Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I am Brandy Koski, and I'm with the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry at Psychiatrist.com. I'm joined today by Dr. Patrick A. Oliver with Mindpeace Clinics and Dr. Albert J. Arias with the Institution for Drug and Alcohol Studies and the Department of Psychiatry at Virginia Commonwealth University. Thank you both for being here today. They are going to discuss for the next 10 or 15 minutes their really kind of powerful breakthrough research that they just published at the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry on September 12th, a retrospective chart review titled Clinical Effectiveness of Intravenous Racemic Ketamine Infusions in a Large Community Sample of Patients with Treatment-Resistant Depression, Suicidal Ideation, and Generalized Anxiety Symptoms. Really excited to hear what you guys have to share today. And I'm going to hand it over to you now. So thanks for being here.
You want to start? What did you think after we kind of got the data and crunched it and you started seeing the numbers?
Oh, well, it was a great thing to see it all out there. I think in general, one of the great things about the study is that it's good to see that in the real world that things play out like we think they're going to play out.
Yeah.
Ketamine is a wonderful treatment, and it looks great in a lot of the small controlled trials.
Mm-hmm.
But then when you have something that's still fairly new like that, you wonder, well, what really goes on with it in the real world when it's administered to depression patients en masse? Do you see the kind of good results that you want to see? And I think we did. So that was really great to see that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting when I first started doing this 5 years ago. It was like I saw some patients at another clinic out in Seattle, and I was like, I was very skeptical for starters, and it was just really kind of amazing to see like how quickly that we had an impact in, getting the numbers together after 424 patients. We actually have enough to show like, okay, this is the impact that we are having.
Yeah, and it's quite a good impact, very positive effect. And I think after working in psychiatry for so long and prescribing all these medications, these daily medications, when something new comes along that offers something different and with a rapid response, I think we're all skeptical.
Sure.
And that a treatment like that can have such a big effect. But clearly it can, and so it's good to see that. And it's funny, because I feel like often psychiatrists are skeptical, or they're very much in the ketamine believers or in the disbelievers camp.
I've seen both camps. I'm not going to lie.
And I'm a skeptic naturally, but I also I like statistics and numbers, and and a lot of the stuff leading up to this was pretty good. It shows that this is something that really probably works pretty well. But there's still unanswered questions, and who does it work for best? How does it work for the average depression patient out in the world? And so it's good to see that it worked well. And I think we found, kind of what you should find, based on the preliminary, studies and everything. It seems to be pretty darn effective for some people, and pretty effective for a lot more. And overall, it works for a lot of people, not everyone.
Sure.
And that it seems to have probably some big advantages over the daily pill kind of stuff that we've been doing for a long time.
Yeah.
And so it's very encouraging. And I guess, as someone who's been doing psychiatry for a long time, we haven't had a whole lot of major breakthroughs and advancements in treatments, throughout the 20 some years that I've been doing it. But I think that this really will help move things forward.
Yeah, when I was kind of looking at the numbers, the generalized anxiety 30%, I was like, okay, this is definitely impact. And then I saw 38% remission of basically depression symptoms, which I thought was pretty impressive. And then what is it? I saw, 72%. I was like, okay, that's tracking about what we're thinking. But the number that really blew me away was that 85% of suicidal ideation at 15 infusions, and just showing that curve, I think figure 5 in the paper, where it just showed how quickly it went down. I mean, and we're talking full resolution of suicidal ideation. And I mean, we don't really have much else, in the world of either emergency medicine or psychiatry that has that quick an impact on such a serious disease. It's, one of the top 10 killers from like 14 to 64-year-olds.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a powerful effect. I think clinically, what else more could we want to do for people than get rid of their suicidal ideation rapidly?
Yeah.
And that was great to see. And I'm very positive about it and about the future of ketamine. And
yeah, I mean, I think the approach of like actually having a medication that would regrow dendritic spines, make new connections or reestablish connections in the brain. And, even just the thought of GABA and glutamate being, a neurotransmitter, pair that balances each other, maybe, it's just a different key for the lock that, that the psychiatry is just kind of starting to understand. But, as opposed to your serotonin based or your dopamine based or even your norepi, I mean, it really can have some pretty good impact.
Yeah. And, I think it's interesting. We have a treatment that works for a lot of people. Right now, insurances don't really want to cover it. I mean, that's my understanding. Is that right? Is that what
I mean, it's really tragic. I mean, you have the S-ketamine, the ketamine, for those who might not be familiar, has enantiomers, a right and left-handed side, and Johnson & Johnson, Janssen Pharmaceuticals played a shell game, and they took the left-handed side and they patented it, and they're charging almost $1,000 for what costs me on the retail market, less than a couple bucks. They patented it, they've got the codes, they've got everything else, and they're charging, more than $1,000 for a treatment that I'm doing for $500. And it really is frustrating that an insurance company would pay for a nasal spray that doesn't work as well because the absorption is less than 50%, and they won't pay for IV-ketamine, which could save, hospitalizations. I mean, lost time at work. I mean, suicides, failed suicide attempts. I mean, it just seems like the logic, of taking care of patients isn't present in the present insurance-based approach to caring for patients.
Yeah. And they're not necessarily paying for the Johnson & Johnson product either, right? I think sometimes you can under very limited circumstances, but they resist that even. I think it'd be great if patients could have access to ketamine and in a cost-effective manner.
No, absolutely. I mean, and it's a tough thing because this is one of the very few diseases that affects how people take care of it. Like if either of us were diagnosed with cancer, we'd be going to an oncologist as soon as possible. And if somebody's depressed, I mean, they're in bed, they're not going to work, they're not interacting, they're isolating themselves from family. And I mean, it really is an impactful disease that's fatal ultimately.
Absolutely. And huge contributor to disability. Absolutely.
Yeah. So we're getting some questions to share some of our key findings. I'll start with the one that I'm most passionate about is suicidal ideation. Like I mentioned earlier, I think it's figure 5 on the chart, but at 3 infusions, we have 22% resolution of suicidal ideation. At 6 infusions, we had 50% resolution. And we're literally talking within 2 weeks, 50% resolution of suicidal ideation. And some patients experienced relief within hours. At 10 infusions, we had 75%, and at 15 infusions, we kind of topped out at 85% complete resolution of suicidal ideation, which is faster than anything else, let alone the only thing, but I mean, it's faster than anything else out there. What about the depression numbers? You remember those off the top of your head?
Well, I remember the the overall findings. I think we had 78 or 70 some percent for response. overall, and then almost 40% for remission. And that's pretty good for a community sample of people that almost all have refractory depression, treatment-resistant depression. So I thought that was a finding that kind of speaks for itself.
Yeah, and I think we mentioned earlier the 30% resolution of generalized anxiety, which is kind of tough to quantify. But I mean, it's taking somebody who's being basically paralyzed from anxiety to functional. It's not a complete remission for most people, but for some it is.
What other? Do we have any other questions?
Not quite yet. How accessible is ketamine for treatment?
I think probably the biggest barrier is the payment, right? For some people, and hopefully insurance companies will start to consider this the legitimate treatment that it likely is and start paying for it more. I think I run into that clinically managing depressed patients a lot. I see a lot of people that probably would benefit from ketamine, but they have trouble finding the money and whatnot. So
yeah,
I'd like to see that. I think that'd be a big thing. Part of parity, for mental health is covering treatments like this that can help people.
Yeah. So it's interesting. When I started, there were somewhere between 25 and 50 clinics in the United States, and I've been doing this for 5 years, since 2017. So one of the original guys doing this, and now we're at 3 clinics. But overall, there's somewhere between 600 and 1,000 clinics throughout the United States, and they have varying degrees of quality, which is always an issue when something's new and maybe not fully accepted. And so when we look at that, I kind of try to look at different places that have, physician-based psychiatry, emergency medicine, anesthesia are the 3 primaries that are kind of doing this treatment for patients. And, I think the patients should go to their psychiatrist and talk about it, and definitely can strongly consider it. As a psychiatrist, what would you think would be your approach to do, or how do you think that this should be approached by your community of psychiatrists for either depression or suicide or suicidal patients, et cetera?
Well, I think, there's a growing body of evidence to support the treatment, and to support ketamine as an intervention, its various forms. And I think that, this is a form that is as good as the others, or, maybe better. We don't know. And that would be a good thing to research.
Sure.
But
in our free time.
yes.
Our free time.
But I think I see this as something where there's more room for us to put it to use more than we're doing right now in the armamentarium, to intervene sooner and more definitively with these kind of symptoms. And so that's where I see. I think we have evidence that shows that it's very helpful, and we should be using it more, I think. There still are a number of questions, and long-term impact and things like that. But we know that the short to medium-term impact of these symptoms and syndromes are bad,
Yeah.
And so this gives us another tool, and I think that's where the field will probably move. And it's just, when things are new, there's always inertia, but I think
I hadn't noticed there was inertia in the psychiatry community. We got another question. Associated risk factors. I'm assuming, would you think that's side effects, or what do you think?
I don't know. I assume they're maybe talking about, maybe things that are associated with a better outcome versus a worse outcome. I assume that's what they're talking about. And so we looked at that, using kind of a traditional method of, doing logistic regression and looking at, the correlation with the response. And interestingly, there really wasn't anything that was statistically significant that stood out. And we looked at a number of things that have been either thought to diminish the effect of ketamine on outcomes, and some of the things that maybe had or had been indicated as maybe making a person more likely to respond or remit. But that all seemed to sort of wash out. So that was encouraging in a way, in that at least, like for example, having a history of addiction in this sample did not lead to worse outcomes in terms of depression response. And a number, we looked at a number of other things, and there was maybe there was a not quite significant trend for a couple of things, and I forget what it was off the top of my head. It might have been.
I think personality disorders was one of those, and increased planning for suicidal, for suicidal ideation planning. I think was another one that trended towards, having a higher impact, but didn't meet statistical significance. The population that we looked at were private ketamine clinics in Virginia. One is located in Arlington. These are Mindpeace clinics. One is located in Arlington, one's in Richmond, and one's in Norfolk. And the cost per infusion was $495. And as you can see by the data, we initially went by the National Institutes of Mental Health and how they kind of ran their studies. So we started with that. So those were the standards that we used for inclusion for our patients and accepting patients. And the treatment was $495. We started with 6 infusions for most patients, and our data showed, which I was a little bit surprised with, but that the results actually going out to 10 infusions for a lot of patients did make sense. So I think that that's the standard that we are starting to use now, between 6 and 10 infusions. And the benefits lasting, it really depends on the patient. I had a patient the other day, and 20 months later, she showed back up for boosters. A lot of patients just get, a more permanent relief, a year plus. But between probably 50 and 60% of patients need boosters on a regular basis, meaning, monthly or whatever. But I think that's a great thing for us to look at maybe in the next paper that we were discussing doing in your free time.
Yeah.
So the other question we get, are there any guidelines we should follow for practice of the use of IV-ketamine in depression and patients having suicidal intent? There are guidelines. The American Psychiatric Association published guidelines in March of 2017, and that can be looked up. It's a consensus statement. And there was some that were just published, I believe, out of Canada. And it was published probably this year. Or the end of 2021, and it's a new consensus statement, which is kind of showing what's happening. I think our paper is kind of the next evolution of a large 2 or 3, maybe even 4 larger ketamine-related papers showing, large scale results, and then going from there. What do you think?
Yeah, and I think probably it's more work needs to be done before we really can know what the best way to use it is in these patients. But you could refer to those guidelines if you wanted to, just in addressing that question. One of the things, have we caught up on questions? Right?
Yeah, the guidelines. Yeah, and there's no official guidelines or protocols. It might be a little premature for protocols. And I think the more experienced physicians that are doing this are titrating to effective partial disassociation, which is what we're doing at Mindpeace clinics. And I think the experience of sending individuals to individuals experienced in this, it could be very helpful and be the difference between good results versus excellent results. The last question, have you thought about ketamine treatment in emergency hospital settings after something like a failed suicide attempt, or is it really something that should be administered more regularly? From the emergency medicine perspective, it might be a tad early to be doing this, but I actually heard for the first time ever a local emergency department emergency physician who I'm not familiar with in the Richmond, Virginia area actually administered an infusion of ketamine for suicidal ideations. I think it's an appropriate place to start a therapy if somebody is acutely suicidal. I think that follow-up is very important, both with psychiatry as well as, physicians like me who do administer ketamine, because it's not just a one treatment and done deal. It's a series of infusions, 6 to 10 infusions, and regular oversight and interacting with watching these patients, because these patients are very sick and sometimes they don't appear very sick, which can be misleading.
Right. Yeah, and who knows? Maybe we'll get to the point though where we're starting it in the ER and things like that. I agree. It's like that's the beginning of the treatment, and what's important is making sure people have access to care and treatment and everything that goes into that.
Sure.
And but on the other hand, it's like 10 years ago, to draw an analogy here. I think no one would have thought of giving Suboxone to opioid addicted patients, in the emergency room, or that we should be discharging them. But now it's come around to the point where, the standard has changed so much that we feel like if we don't do that, if they're not leaving with some or with access to some before they even get to a clinic in person, that it's bad care. And we have a bridge clinic where we often either start it in the ER, or if we don't start it in the ER, they have a follow-up telehealth appointment to prescribe Suboxone the same week, and before they even have to set their foot in a clinic, to show up. So, we may see, analogously at some point in the future, that people are starting their treatment in the emergency room, and whether they continue it, with infusions on an inpatient unit, or in partial hospital program or something, but we may see a time where we jumpstart things rather than say, oh, well, let's wait and we'll see the placement is. And
no, I think it's good. And I mean, I think you raise a great point as we kind of concluding here. I think there needs to be a systemic approach to treating sick, depressed, and suicidal patients, as well as patients with paralyzing generalized anxiety. And when we take the next steps of instituting those systemic things, starting in the emergency department, I think we can't start earlier than that. I think that's a great place to start in the acute phase, after the evaluation by a physician. So, but I think thanks for your time, and let's see if there's any other questions or anything else we can, address.
Oh, okay. All right. So I guess we're going to wrap it up.
Oh. Well, hey, thank you so much for everybody for coming in. If you have any other questions for myself, I can be reached at mindpeaceclinics.com. And
I'm available. You can get my email online, but I'll give it to you now. It's albert.arias, ARIAS, @vcuhealth.org.
And if you want to take a look at the article, it's available at psychiatrist.com. Journal of Clinical Psychiatry was kind enough to publish it on the 12th of September, and it's available both online and hopefully the print edition soon, if I haven't seen it in the print edition yet.
Right.
So,
I don't either.
Awesome. Well, hey, thank you so much for everybody. Really appreciate it. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and either patients or mental health professionals. We're happy to answer any questions we can. And hopefully we'll be publishing next year again with a little bit more detail and some clarifications on some things we weren't able to fit into the initial article.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
Thanks. Appreciate you guys.